Welcome to The Explainer. You know, we often think that success is all about talent, right? The gifts we're born with. But what if one of the most successful founders on the planet, Jeff Bezos, says that's completely backward? Today, we're diving into his powerful framework, one that argues our lives are defined not by our gifts, but by our choices.
So let's start with a question Jeff Bezos himself asks, because the answer is really at the heart of his entire journey. It's this choice, right? The choice between just kind of coasting along or actively chasing down a passion. Now, this whole philosophy, it wasn't cooked up in some boardroom. It actually started with one single life-changing choice. Picture this. Bezos is in New York City. He's got a great job, a boss he really admires, a totally secure future. But he also had this nagging idea that just wouldn't leave him alone. So he takes this idea to his boss. They go for a long walk in Central Park, and the advice he gets back is, well, it's pretty sensible. His boss says, look, that's a good idea, but it would be a better idea for someone who didn't already have a good job. And that left him with this incredibly tough call between the security he had and the passion he just couldn't shake. So, to make this huge decision, he creates this mental model. He calls it the Regret-Minimization framework. And honestly, it's surprisingly simple. All he did was project himself forward in time to age 80. And from that viewpoint, he looked back on his life to figure out which path would leave him with the fewest regrets. And from that perspective, looking back as his 80-year-old self, the answer just became crystal clear. He knew he wouldn't regret trying and failing. What he would be haunted by, forever, was the decision to never even take this shot. So he chose to trade that safe path for a great story. Okay, so this decision-making tool wasn't just some clever business trick. It was actually the practical result of a really deep personal philosophy, a philosophy that makes a critical distinction between two things that all of us have. At the very heart of his thinking is this crucial distinction. So the first category he talks about is gifts. These are your natural talents, right? The things that just come easy to you. Maybe you're great at math, maybe you're a gifted artist. Bezos says these are things you're given. He even argues that your passions, they often choose you. And then there's the second, and honestly, far more important category, choices. This is where the real work comes in. Choices are what you do with your gifts. It's the decision to put in the hours, to practice, to consciously choose a life of adventure over a life of just ease. So here's the absolute crux of it. You can, and you absolutely should, be grateful for your gifts. They're invaluable. But you can only be truly proud of your choices. Why? Because those are the things you actively build. They would define the actual story of your life. So you might be wondering, how does a personal philosophy like this scale up to a global company? Well, Bezos translated his focus on making hard, deliberate choices into the three foundational pillars of Amazon's DNA. These are the core ideas that drive every single decision they make. He calls these three ideas the Amazon cocktail. It's a relentless obsession with the customer, a deep commitment to long-term thinking, and this unwavering passion for invention. And these aren't just corporate buzzwords on a wall. They are totally interconnected principles. And this is where you can see how perfectly these three ideas lock together. Think about it. You can't invent for customers if you're not willing to experiment and fail. And you can't afford to fail if you're not thinking long-term. Because real innovation, it's never instant. Each one of these principles makes the others possible. All right, so how do you actually implement these big kind of abstract ideas day to day? To make sure these principles weren't just nice posters on a wall, Bezos developed what's now a famous toolkit of really practical, everyday rules for his teams. First up is the 70% rule. The belief here is simple. If you wait until you have 90% of the information you think you need, you are already too late. Speed matters. So the goal is to make high-quality, high-velocity decisions with about 70% of the data, and then just be ready to course-correct as you go. Next, to stop inefficiency and bureaucracy from creeping in, he created the famous two-pizza rule. The logic is so simple. If a team is too big to be fed by two pizzas, it's just too big. Smaller teams communicate way more effectively, and, well, they get more done. You know how you can get stuck in endless debates or analysis paralysis? To avoid that, he uses this simple but really powerful phrase. It doesn't mean you have to agree with the final call, but it does mean that once a decision is made, everybody on the team commits to making it a success. No passive-aggressive sabotage, just pure forward momentum. And this might be the most famous rule of all. He banned PowerPoint. Yep, completely banned it from senior meetings. Instead, they use narratively structured 6-page memos. Meetings at that level literally begin with up to 30 minutes of silent reading. Why? To force everyone to engage deeply with the material and to foster real critical thinking before any discussion even begins. Ultimately, Bezos brings this whole thing full circle, right back to where it all started, the individual. He argues that our lives are a story that we get to write from scratch, and that story is defined by the hard choices we make along the way.
He challenges all of us to think about the choices that will ultimately define us when we look back on our own lives. He asks these incredibly powerful questions, just like these, that force us to confront the trade-offs that really shape who we become. And so we end up right where we began. In the end, it's not about the gifts you were given, it's about what you build with them. The story of your life will be the story of your choices. So the only question left is, what kind of story are you going to write?